old-time people play music that live down the street. I live in a little old community where the confluence of the Greenbrier and the New River come together near Hinton, West Virginia, and that community was called Bell Point. They started developing this in around World War I era, and one of the old builders, literally one of the carpenters of that community, lived down the street from us in an old house that he had built about 1915. And in the evening, he'd come out and play the banjo on the porch, and I was probably 8 or 10 years old, and they were really an anachronism. This family was really interesting. They were a son and a daughter, and the wife, who I found out later was college educated. I really got to know her in her late 80s, and a very soft-spoken, perfect grammar lady, and her old man was just like Daniel Boone. That was extreme. They talk about totally two extremities of people. And that reminds me of an old expression. Old people said, you know, you'd run into that situation where people were so totally different, you know, and yet they could, you know, they could court and spark and marry and you know, cohabitate and be able to get along with one another. And an old fellow explained it to me like this one time. He said, you know, in fact, the question was presented to him. He said, old man Lester Duncan, I was a young fellow, and we were coming out of a store, and this old man Duncan stopped Mr. Cales, and he said, you know, Clarence, he said, they were contemporaries. They were in, I was probably 15. They were in their late 70s and could outwork a 20-year-old. And the old man hit old man Cales up, and he said, you know, I've got a question I want to ask you, Clarence. He said, I've studied about this right smart. He said, you know, you and your wife, you all were so different. He said, when we were young fellas, he said, you weren't that good looking of a man. He said, she was one pretty looking woman. And he said, we never could understand what she saw in you. You know, he said, we couldn't get her to go to church or a pie supper or a square dance or anything. He said, she was yours lock, stock, and barrel. He said, and y'all just said, he said, you were just a rough looking fellow when you were young. He said, how do you explain that? And old man Cales looked at him. I will never forget this. And he said, you know, he said, Lester, he said, I've studied about that right smart myself. And he said, I've come to believe, he said, love is just like lightning. It's as apt to strike an outhouse as it is a castle. That is such a great expression. It just typifies so many situations, you know, people who are odds at religion, and yet, you know, they're married or they're good friends, or you know, they're odds politically, and it's a profound statement. And as these old Appalachian people are and were, they had so few words to get a point across. They didn't have to go on and elaborate, you know, paragraph after paragraph. They just had these little things that just brought it right to the forefront. You knew exactly what was being said, either positively or negative. So I hung around. I made a choice to hang around people like that. My granddad on my dad's side was Italian. They were Southern Italian, coming from Calabria, Calabrese people from Italy. Mom's people were Welsh and German and Irish, and we actually had a little bit of Jewish people in our family. I've been finding, I always suspected, and I know for a fact now that they were. But anyway, the Jewish people got absorbed in the Appalachian Mountains early on, and so they couldn't express their culture. I'm convinced that's a study that somebody ought to make about that. How they were German Jews, and I am convinced that they were. And Mother said, you know, it's so funny because Great-Grandma Fink never had any affiliation with any kind of religion at all. And her grandfather, she was a white cotton from Wirt County. And Grandma Fink married old man Andrew Fink. William Pice. But anyway, Andrew, his daddy, was a gun maker, made long rifles over in Blue Sulphur Spring, West Virginia. In the 1840s, I know he was making rifles. But these Finks, Daniel came from Germany, came through Philadelphia. But anyway, I just chose because of my granddad Jones especially. He was quite a historian, family historian. We would sit and talk for hours, you know, about what Uncle Lash Jones did during the Civil War. And I just was fascinated with stories coming from my little core of the family, but then I started going out and seeking other people, contemporaries of my grandfather. So getting back to my banjo mentor, old man Ballard, grew up there in the community and helped build our community. He would come out at night on the porch and play this banjo. And we lived about a half a block and you crossed Central Avenue, and he was right on the corner of Central and Maple. And he had a big farm, he had a huge garden And they were literally anachronisms. He'd come out on the porch in the morning. They had electric lights, but they did not have indoor plumbing. Everybody around them had homes from, really nice homes that were built in the 20s and 30s. It was a very middle class income community. Here his was a big old barn-like house with a front porch all the way across it. He was quite a deer hunter, and he had all these old deer mounted across on the wall of the porch. He had about 4 big buck deer with the big antlers, and I watched those clear up until I was 50-some years old, just totally disintegrate. I used to go by there, and all the hide was stretching, and the teeth were all falling out. I was observant of these things from the early 50s up through at least, I'll say 1985 or so. They had all died off, but the old house was there. It was torn down, and this fella just basically built a mansion there. But in my time, we'd go by there, and in the morning, we'd ride our bicycle to school, and on the back porch, those old fellows would come out, his son Wills Ballard, and the old man, and they had a mirror on the porch. They had a bench, they called it a water bench, had a couple of buckets of water, and I don't care if it was 10 degrees below zero, they were out there shaving. Every morning, they'd come out in that old steaming pan, they'd have them some heated water. The kitchen was right, they'd come out their kitchen door, and they'd have that heated water, and they'd lather all up. Boy, it'd be 10 below zero, and they're out there just shaving away. And that, like I said, they were total anachronisms to our community. Our community had doctors and businessmen, and my father was a businessman early in the community, and so it was really something. So I really got attracted to these old folks. So one time I went over there. I was about 14 years old. I said, Mr. Ballard, I'd love to learn to play the banjo, and I know you played. And I heard Earl Scruggs and some of these people, but I knew he played this old-timey style. So he was 87 years old. He was born in 1876. And he gave me a piece of an old banjo that he had ordered from Sears and Roebuck about World War I. And I asked him, I said, how did you learn to play? He played two-finger style. He knew the claw hammer, he knew of it, but he didn't play it. He said, I learned from an old black man in my community over in Ballard, West Virginia, which is in Monroe County. Ballard is a plateau community. There's a certain place you go down the Adair Ridge Road, and it's named for old man Ballard's people. The Ballards were in that country from Indian early settlement days. And he said there was an old black man. He said he'd come out of the New River settlements. Well, that was the slave settlement. That was there were plantations on the New River, and when the emancipation came, the Packs and the Medlins and the Medleys and the Gores and the Agees, and the Crockett's, they were all black families that were on these river plantations. The Dickerson, the Crump plantation, the old Dickerson plant. These were old brick homes with the columns, built in the 1820s and 30s. When they were emancipated, those people started moving out of those communities on the river and coming onto the plateaus. This old man, Agee, I found out later who this, I was too young to ask the right questions. But I knew a black historian out of my area is phenomenally intelligent. He just knew everything. And I asked him, I said, Mr. Crawford, who do you think would have been in that country down there where those Ballards? He said, Jim, it was the Agees. He said they came off of those river plantations, and he said, I know that they played music. And he said, I'll bet you anything it was that old man Agee that taught your mentor. So Mr. Ballard, when he would play the banjo, he did this, I hope my finger will accommodate me today. He'd get this rhythm. So he would do a lot of these pinchings. He would pinch. Which is a very harmonious harmonious chord. You know, it all fits in with one another. It's a natural musical sound. I don't know music, so I'm trying to explain in my limited terms of being a musicologist or a musician. So it was very interesting, and I learned he couldn't play very well. In fact, his banjo was a wreck, and he said, if you can get this old thing fixed up, bring it back and I'll show you what little bit I can do. So he did. That was what he impressed upon me. He played in G, and he had this leading thumb style. So I went from that, and then about a year later, a fellow named Harlow Kales came back in our community. I'd known him as a young boy, and Harlow was a really good clawhammer player, and his sons, we were all about at that point about 16, 17 years old, and they had gone to Arizona. Their dad had really serious respiratory problems, and he was a hostler on the railroad, is what he worked down in the yards on the railroad, and he had done a lot of floor sanding too on the side, and it had worked on his lungs. But Harlow was a great old-time clawhammer player. His boys had learned, most of them went towards bluegrass, but Tommy had learned to play the clawhammer style. I was playing a style, and I was totally ass backwards on the clawhammer. I was playing like this. I've been doing that about a year, and you know, it's hard to break a bad habit. And Tommy, I will never forget when they came back. They came and lived in our community up about 1.5 miles up the road, and I'd walk after school and we'd sit and play. His brother played real good guitar, became quite a flat picker guitarist. So Tommy said, well, that style's all right, but he said, Jim, it's backwards. He said, that's not clawhammer. And so, you know, and his dad was helping me, so they broke me of that style. But I included in a lot of, I found out by playing a lot of Uncle Dave Macon's music, that man did anything at any time he wanted to do with his right hand. And I was very prone to do that before I ever heard him playing. So that's where, but I want to play you some of the